What would you do if the person you loved most built a secret life behind your back? Imagine standing in the rain at Chicago's Union Station, watching your husband kiss another woman while their little boy holds his hand. That's not just betrayal, that's devastation. If you've ever lived through or even witnessed heartbreak like this, share your thoughts in the comments. You're watching this story unfold, stay with us until the end. It only gets more shocking. People always say marriages end in one dramatic moment, a slammed door, a shouted confession, a suitcase dragged across the porch in the middle of the night. But if I'm honest, mine didn't shatter like glass. It unraveled like thread pulled loose, one quiet tug at a time, until the whole thing collapsed in my hands. My name is Claire Thompson, 34, music teacher in a modest public school on the outskirts of Chicago. I teach piano in the afternoons, mostly to kids who can barely reach the pedals but surprise me with the honesty in their notes. I have one daughter, Sophie, 15. Whip-smart and sharper than half the adults I know. And I have or maybe had a husband, Daniel Reed. We were high school sweethearts, prom dates, first kisses under the bleachers, first everything. The kind of couple people looked at and said, they'll make it, they're solid. For a while we were. Our life was not glamorous. We rented a 2-bedroom apartment near my parents'. The carpet was worn, the walls beige, but the space was filled with laughter. Family dinners were our ritual, mashed potatoes passed around, Sophie's teenage sarcasm bouncing between us, and Daniel's eyes crinkling as he teased me about my teacher voice. We didn't have much money, but we had routine, warmth, and the comfort of knowing what tomorrow might look like. But happiness doesn't always explode when it leaves. Sometimes it slips quietly out the back door, and you don't notice until the silence grows loud. It started about 5 years ago, when Sophie was 10. Daniel began working late. First once a week, then twice. He said there were networking drinks, team dinners, weekend golf outings. The excuses stacked like unpaid bills. He still came home, still kissed me on the cheek, still sat at the dinner table occasionally. But there was something missing in his eyes, a blankness, like he was already somewhere else. At first I told myself it was stress. The economy was rough, his industry was competitive. I kept trying to believe him when he said, no one, just work stuff. But his words grew shorter, his tone flatter. Eventually, his messages dwindled into cold little texts. Eating late, don't wait up, I stopped setting 3 plates at dinner. Sophie noticed too. She never said anything, but I caught her scraping his untouched food into the trash more than once. So it became just the two of us: movie nights, baking disasters, late-night piano duets where she hit all the wrong notes but laughed until tears streamed down her cheeks. We made our own world. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Still, I missed him. God, I missed him, even when I hated myself for it. Teaching music has always been more than a job for me, it's my dream. Since I was 16, I imagined having a home with a small studio, soundproof walls, a real grand piano, shelves lined with metronomes and old sheet music. I used to keep paint swatches tucked into a drawer, soft blues, creams, colors that whispered of possibility. But the dream stayed folded away, because we were still renting, still waiting for the right time. One Saturday morning, Sophie was at a friend's sleepover, and for the first time in months, it was just me and Daniel in the kitchen. The air felt heavy with quiet, like even the refrigerator didn't want to hum. I poured him a cup of coffee, set it in front of him, and said gently, I've been thinking, maybe we should start looking at buying, even something small, a place that's really ours. Sophie's getting older, and I'd love to finally set up a proper music studio. He didn't look up from his phone. Then he laughed. Not a soft chuckle. A sharp, mocking laugh that sliced through me. Claire, I'm 36. If we take out a mortgage now, we'll be in debt until retirement if we even make it that far. We missed the window. You buy a house when your kid is little, raise them there. His words hit harder than I expected. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. It's not about Pinterest boards, Daniel. It's about independence, security. You've always hated paying rent. He grabbed his keys, slid his phone into his pocket, and said flatly, I'm not talking about this. We can't afford it. End of story. Then, he walked out. No kiss, no goodbye. The coffee sat cooling on the counter. I stood there, staring at the untouched cup, the silence pressing down. For the first time, I felt the ache of being invisible. That night, rain tapped against the kitchen window while I waited for him. By 10:30, I'd checked my phone a dozen times. By 11, I was pacing, restless. Sophie was still at her friend's house. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty, and then I did something that even now feels unreal. I grabbed my keys, slipped on a jacket, and drove toward Union Station. I remembered Daniel casually mentioning he'd been downtown earlier that week, something about drinks with colleagues. I told myself it was foolish, but hope is stubborn. Maybe if he saw me waiting, maybe if we drove home together, something in him would soften. The streets shimmered under the drizzle, lights blurring across the windshield. I parked a block away, heart thudding, and stared at the glowing arrivals screen through the rain. A train pulled in. Passengers trickled out, shoulders hunched against the weather, and then I saw him, Daniel. Same gray coat, same familiar gait, but he wasn't alone. Beside him walked a woman with a bright red umbrella, elegant in her tan coat and low heels. She was pretty in a quiet, professional way. And with them, a little boy, maybe 5 or 6, with a yellow backpack shaped like a shark. The boy reached up and grabbed Daniel's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. The woman said something. Daniel laughed. Then he leaned in and kissed her. Not on the cheek, on the mouth. My breath caught, frozen. The rain blurred everything except that single image burned into my eyes, my husband, my partner, living another life, another family. The buzzing in my ears drowned out the city. My chest felt like it was collapsing. I didn't see the traffic light change. I didn't see the truck barreling through the intersection. All I remember is the slam of metal, the violent lift of my body, the shatter of glass, and then darkness. The first thing I felt was cold. Not the clean chill of winter, but a damp, sterile cold that sank into my bones. Then the beeping, a steady rhythm, like a metronome, dragging me back to consciousness. My eyelids were heavy, but I forced them open. Fluorescent lights glared above me, buzzing faintly. The smell of disinfectant clung to everything. A nurse appeared. Her voice hushed but urgent. "You're awake. Don't move too quickly." I tried to shift, but my body didn't obey. A tight panic coiled in my chest. My right leg was there. My left leg was gone. Not bandaged in a way that promised healing, not broken in a cast. Just gone, the blanket tucked under where my knee should have been. A scream ripped through my throat, raw and animal. The nurse gripped my arm, whispering reassurances I couldn't hear. All I could hear was the crash, the slam, the memory of headlights in the rain and Daniel's hand holding someone else's. The next face I saw was Sophie's. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hand trembling as she brushed the hair off my forehead. "Mom, thank God. You're awake." Her voice cracked, but she tried to smile. She was only 15, yet she looked older in that moment, older than me. I tried to speak, my throat dry as sand. What happened?" "There was an accident," she whispered. "A truck at the station." Of course, the station. My memory blurred at the edges. But the sharpest fragment was not the crash. It was Daniel's laugh. That woman's red umbrella. The boy's tiny fingers gripping his hand. "I'll get the doctor," Sophie said quickly, as if afraid of my questions. "And I'll call Dad." She slipped out before I could protest. The doctors came. They talked about miracles, survival, nerve trauma. They said words like prosthetic and physical therapy. I nodded, but none of it reached me. My mind replayed only one thing. The look on Daniel's face when he saw me in that parking lot. He froze. Just for a heartbeat. Like a man caught. And then nothing. He didn't run to me. He didn't call out. He let me step into traffic. 3 days later, I was discharged. They wheeled me into our apartment, and for the first time I understood how small it truly was. The hallways were narrow, the kitchen a maze. My wheelchair scraped walls, bruised my knuckles, caught on the old carpet. Simple things, cooking, showering, moving from one room to another, became battles I lost daily. Daniel tried it first. He came home earlier, cooked a couple of meals, even offered to help me dress. But it was mechanical, like he was ticking boxes. He avoided eye contact. His touch was gone. Once, when I asked for help climbing into bed, I caught him wincing, as if my need was something disgusting. My voice broke when I whispered, "I'm sorry." He replied flatly, "Don't worry about it," and left the room. I stopped asking. Sophie, my sweet girl, did everything she could. She brewed tea, fluffed pillows, painted my nails in bright colors as if to remind me I was still alive. But I couldn't meet her eyes for long. I felt like I had failed her, like half of me had died and the other half didn't know how to mother anymore. The days blurred. Sleep during the day, numbness at night. My piano sat in the corner like an accusation. The dream of my studio felt laughable now. What was a pianist without two legs? What was a teacher who couldn't stand beside her students, adjust their hands, guide their rhythm? Then one Tuesday afternoon, Daniel came home early. His keys clattered onto the counter. He stood in the doorway, his posture stiff, his voice detached the same tone he used with customer service reps. "I think we should separate," he said. The words sliced through the room. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "I am. I can't do this, Claire. You're different now. It's too heavy. The emotions, the helplessness. I didn't sign up to be a caregiver." His words were stones, each one landing in my chest. "I didn't sign up to lose a leg, Daniel," I said, my voice trembling. He shrugged. "We're both miserable. Why drag it out?" I should have screamed. I should have begged or cursed or thrown something. But I didn't. I just said, "Fine." He blinked. "Seriously? You want a divorce?" "You'll get it," I said. My voice flat. "But you're coming with me to tell your parents. They deserve to hear it from both of us. I gave them 20 years of my life." His jaw tightened. "Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," I echoed. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, a plan began to take shape. Not revenge. Not yet. Just clarity. I remembered the box in our closet. Daniel had probably forgotten it existed. Inside were old hard drives and SD cards from our previous car. The one with the dash cam I insisted on after a near miss years ago. When we traded in the car last year, he never bothered to wipe the recordings. My hands shook as I loaded one into my laptop, and there it was. Footage from that night. Rain streaking the windshield. The glow of the platform. Daniel stepping off the train. The red umbrella. The kiss. I paused, zoomed in. Clear as day, not just a fling, a family. I rewound, over and over, until my stomach churned. Then another memory surfaced, the split second before the truck hit me. I had seen Daniel. I had seen his face freeze. He let it happen. My fingers flew as I dug deeper. Old emails, phone bills, bank statements. The trail wasn't even hidden. Transfers to a woman named Rachel Miller, a shared lease on a townhouse in Naperville. Utilities, tuition, furniture deliveries. By morning, I had more than suspicion. I had names, dates, documents. The boy's name was Ethan. His mother, Rachel. Daniel hadn't just cheated. He had built a second life, and I was the casualty for discovering it. The ride to Daniel's parents' house was quiet, except for the steady hum of the car. My wheelchair rattled slightly in the back, and I stared out the window, watching the endless stretch of highway from Chicago into Ohio. The gray clouds above matched the heaviness in my chest. Daniel's knuckles were white around the steering wheel. He hadn't asked me if I was ready. He hadn't even asked if I wanted to go. For him, this was just another box to tick. Tell mom and dad, get it over with. I, on the other hand, had been up all night preparing. I wasn't going to walk into his childhood home as the pitiful wife who couldn't keep her husband happy. I was going to walk and roll in with proof. The flash drive sat in my purse, nestled between my wallet and a tube of lipstick I hadn't worn in months. Inside it were the dashcam clips, the bank statements, the PI's report I'd rushed to have compiled. I had turned my hospital bed into a war room. Daniel glanced at me once during the drive, his eyes flat. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I almost laughed. Harder? He thought this was about sparing his parents pain. He had no idea, by the time we pulled into the driveway, the air was thick with late autumn chill. The house was picture-perfect suburban, two-story, shutters painted hunter green, a neat porch swing that swayed gently in the breeze. I remembered sitting on that swing years ago, belly swollen with Sophie, while Margaret brought me iced tea and called me sweetheart. How quickly affection can sour when truths surface. Margaret opened the door, her face lighting up at first until she saw the wheelchair. Her smile faltered, replaced by pity. "Oh, Claire. Honey, you poor thing." "Hi, Margaret," I said softly. My voice didn't shake. Behind her, Charles appeared, his frame still broad despite his age. "We meant to visit you in the hospital," he said, his tone awkward, as if the right time had simply never come. "It's okay," I replied. "I'm just glad we can talk now." Daniel wheeled me inside. The house smelled of pot roast and lemon polish, comforting and stifling all at once. We sat in the living room, the same one where Daniel and I had announced Sophie's birth, where we'd celebrated Christmases with matching pajamas. Now, it felt like a stage set for a very different play. Margaret perched on the edge of the sofa, worry etched on her face. "What's going on?" Daniel said it was important. Daniel cleared his throat. He was nervous, though he tried to mask it. "Things have changed. Claire and I, well, she's different now. And I don't think it's fair to either of us to keep pretending. We're separating." The words landed like a grenade. Margaret gasped. "What? After everything?" "It's nothing dramatic," Daniel rushed. "We're just miserable. Claire needs more than I can give. I didn't sign up to what?" I cut in, my voice quiet but sharp. Daniel's jaw flexed. "To be a caregiver." The silence that followed was suffocating. Margaret covered her mouth. Charles's brows drew together in disapproval. I folded my hands in my lap, steadying my breath. "The word is disabled, Daniel. And yes, I've lost a leg. But don't mistake me for dead weight." Margaret's eyes brimmed. "Sweetheart, we didn't know." "It's fine," I said, meeting her gaze. "I understand. Daniel wants out. I won't fight it." Daniel exhaled, relieved. He thought that was the end, but it wasn't. "Before I sign anything," I continued, "there's something I need you both to see." I pulled the laptop from my bag and set it on the coffee table. Daniel stiffened. "Claire, what are you doing?" "Showing them the truth," I replied. The video played. Rain streaking the dashcam lens. Union Station glowing through the drizzle. Then Daniel appeared. Stepping off the train. The red umbrella. The woman. The kiss. The little boy reaching for his hand. I paused the frame, the image frozen on Daniel's betrayal. Margaret's hand flew to her chest. That's not Sophie." Charles leaned forward, his face pale. "Daniel, who is that child?" Daniel's lips parted, but no words came out. I turned the screen toward him. "You didn't think I'd remember, did you? You thought the crash wiped it all clean. But I saw you. And now they see you too." Margaret's voice broke. "Daniel?" Charles's tone was harder. "Answer her," Daniel stammered. "It's not, look. It's complicated." "I never meant," I cut him off. "His name is Ethan. He's 6. His mother's name is Rachel. I've seen the birth certificate, the lease, the bank transfers. You've been living 2 lives, Daniel. You abandoned Sophie and me to build another family in Naperville." The room cracked open with silence. Margaret's tears slipped down her cheeks. Charles sat back heavily, disappointment radiating from him. Daniel's voice finally rose, defensive. "You went through my stuff?" I smiled coldly. "No, Daniel. I went through mine." The silence was heavier this time, shame dripping into every corner. I closed the laptop gently. "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here for clarity. You want a divorce? Fine. But I won't leave with nothing after giving you 20 years of my life." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" Margaret, panicked, whispered. "Money?" "No," I said firmly. "I want independence. A home that fits me now. A single-level, wheelchair-accessible house with an open floor plan, wide doorways, an ADA-compliant kitchen, and one large studio with proper soundproofing, lighting, and a Yamaha grand piano. A place where I can live and teach, where Sophie and I can breathe, Daniel scoffed. That'll cost hundreds of thousands. Then you'd better get to work, I replied, my tone ice. Margaret looked at her son, then back at me, her face stricken. You'd really keep quiet for that? I'm not looking for revenge, I said calmly. I'm looking for a life. Charles stood, his expression carved in stone. We'll make it happen. Daniel's head whipped toward him. Dad, Charles's voice thundered. Enough. You've made your choices. You'll pay until every dime of that house is covered. Margaret wept quietly. Daniel sat frozen, pale and hollow, as if the walls of his double life were finally caving in. For the first time in months, I felt steady. Not victorious, not vengeful, just steady. The silence in the car on the way back from Ohio was louder than any argument we could have had. Daniel gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might snap. His jaw flexed. His throat worked like he wanted to speak, but he never did. I didn't fill the space either. For the first time in years, I wasn't begging for scraps of his attention. I wasn't trying to smooth the tension or soften the truth. I just let the silence weigh on him. Back at the apartment, Sophie was waiting. She ran to the door the second she heard us. How did it go? She asked. Eyes flicking nervously between us, Daniel muttered, We'll talk later, and disappeared into the bedroom. I reached for Sophie's hand. Come sit with me. We rolled to the kitchen table, where so many dinners had once been shared with laughter and warmth. The same table where Daniel's empty chair had slowly become normal. I didn't want to burden Sophie with details, not yet. But she was too smart to be shielded entirely. Sweetheart, I began. Your father and we're separating. Her lips pressed tight, but her eyes didn't widen with shock. She had seen it coming. Maybe she'd known even before I admitted it to myself. I figured, she whispered. He hasn't really been here for a long time. I swallowed the ache in my throat and smoothed her hair back. I need you to know something. This isn't your fault. None of it. And we're going to be okay. Her chin trembled, but she nodded. Then she whispered the words that both broke and healed me in one breath. I'd rather it just be us than live like this. That night, Daniel slept on the couch. The next morning, he announced he was moving in with a coworker temporarily. He didn't mention Rachel, didn't mention Ethan, but the omission was louder than any admission. For weeks, the apartment became a battleground of avoidance. He came and went like a ghost, dropping envelopes on the counter, signing paperwork with cold efficiency. I focused on Sophie, on relearning how to maneuver through life with one leg, on gathering the pieces of myself he had tried to convince me were useless. But underneath the daily grind, something shifted. I wasn't powerless anymore. The confrontation in Ohio had been more than a revelation, it had been a transaction. I had named my price, and he had no choice but to pay it. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the faintest spark of control. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about watching him squirm. It was about survival. About rebuilding a life where Sophie and I could stand or roll on solid ground again. The following weeks were a blur of negotiations, meetings, and thinly veiled hostility. Daniel's parents stayed in close contact, their voices on the phone laced with both guilt and resignation. Charles made it clear that he expected Daniel to follow through with every promise, no matter the cost. One crisp morning, I sat across from Daniel in a lawyer's office. The smell of old books and stale coffee filled the space. My attorney slid papers across the table, and I signed them with steady hands. Divorce filings, property agreements, financial obligations, all etched in black and white. Daniel's pen scratched reluctantly against the paper. His face was pale, eyes hollow. This wasn't the confident man I'd once fallen for. This was someone unraveling, trapped in the very web he'd spun. When the final signature was done, I looked at him. This doesn't have to be ugly, Daniel, but it does have to be fair. I'm not asking for charity. I'm demanding what I need to live, to teach, to raise Sophie without drowning. He didn't answer. He just shoved the pen into the holder and walked out without another word. Life at home shifted again. Sophie and I began talking about the future in a way that felt new. We sketched ideas for the studio, what color the walls might be, where the piano would sit, how many students could fit. She wanted a corkboard filled with drawings, a lounge corner for parents. Her imagination turned the dream into something tangible, something we could reach for together. And slowly, the idea of a new home began to take shape not just in contracts and blueprints, but in my heart. One evening, as Sophie practiced a simple melody on her keyboard, I found myself crying silently. The notes were clumsy, uneven, but they filled the apartment with a warmth I thought I'd lost forever. I realized then that even broken music is still music. Even broken lives can be rebuilt. Weeks later, Daniel showed up at the apartment unannounced. His face was drawn, exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. He stood awkwardly at the door, holding an envelope. "I brought the first payment," he muttered. I took it, said nothing. He hesitated. "Sophie won't answer my calls, won't respond to my texts." I met his eyes, steady. "She knows enough. She doesn't want lies, Daniel. She wants peace." His throat tightened. "And Ethan," I raised a hand, "that's your problem now." For a moment, anger flickered across his face, quickly replaced by shame. He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. I exhaled slowly. For the first time, I didn't feel hollow after an encounter with him. I felt free. The new house didn't rise overnight. It grew out of paperwork, negotiations, and the quiet fury of obligations Daniel could no longer escape. Every step was a battle of signatures, phone calls, and deadlines. For me, it wasn't just about walls and a roof. It was about reclaiming dignity. About saying, "You don't get to decide whether I'm broken. I decide what my life looks like." The lawyer's office became our battlefield. My attorney sat beside me, sharp and unflinching. Daniel sat across the table, shoulders hunched, eyes ringed with fatigue. He always looked like a man caught between the family he abandoned and the one he tried to replace me with. "This is excessive," Daniel snapped one afternoon, tapping the contract with his pen. "A custom-built house? A full studio? Do you know how much this will cost?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Hundreds of thousands. And you'll pay every dime. You don't get to walk away clean after 20 years. Not after what you've done." His jaw clenched. "You're bleeding me dry." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "No, Daniel. I'm giving you the chance to pay in silence. Would you rather Sophie know every detail? Would you rather your parents learn that you didn't just cheat, you built another family behind our backs? Because I'll show them everything." He didn't answer. The pen shook in his hand before he signed. Outside the office, the air was crisp with late winter wind. I wheeled toward the elevator, the envelope of agreements heavy in my lap. My attorney whispered, "You're holding your ground beautifully." But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. At night, I lay awake in the old apartment, staring at the ceiling, imagining blueprints come to life. Wide doorways, ramps disguised as garden paths, an ADA kitchen where I could cook without bruising my hands on narrow counters, and in the back the studio, a Yamaha Grand gleaming under sunlight, waiting for me. I clung to that vision like oxygen. Sophie became my partner in planning. She spread magazines across the table, circling colors and furniture, sketching crude layouts in her notebook. "Mom, what if the studio had a lounge corner? Parents could sit while their kids practice. And maybe a corkboard with student drawings like a wall of memories." Her ideas were messy, bright, alive. I laughed through tears more than once. "You'd make a great designer." She grinned. "Or your manager." Together, we dreamed. And for the first time in months, Sophie's laughter filled the apartment without that undertone of worry. She was building this future with me, brick by brick. Daniel, meanwhile, grew paler with each meeting. He sent payments reluctantly, dropped off checks with clenched fists. His parents called often, making sure he was following through. I knew Charles had cornered him more than once. "You'll make this right," Charles had told him. "You'll provide what she needs. You'll answer for what you've done." I think in some ways, Daniel resented his father more than me. He could ignore my quiet strength, but not the weight of Charles's disappointment. The house began to take shape in Naperville. I visited weekly, rolling through half-framed hallways, breathing in sawdust and fresh lumber. Workers nodded respectfully, moving aside to give me space. I wasn't just a client. I was a symbol, a woman who demanded space in a world that tried to shrink her. Each visit, Sophie bounded ahead, pointing at where her bedroom would be, where the piano would sit. She hummed little melodies, echoing off unfinished walls. For once, the future didn't feel like something slipping away. It felt like something we were chasing and catching. One afternoon, Daniel showed up at the site. His suit was wrinkled, tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. He looked like a man unraveling. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Checking progress," he muttered. His gaze swept the open floor plan, the wide archways. "You're really going through with this?" "Yes," I said simply. He laughed bitterly. "You always were stubborn." "No," I corrected. "I finally learned not to settle." For a moment something flickered in his eyes, regret, maybe. Or anger that he couldn't control me anymore. But he said nothing more. He just turned and left, his footsteps echoing through the hollow frame. The weeks blurred into months. The house neared completion. And as drywall went up, so did my sense of freedom. Sophie and I packed boxes, preparing to leave behind the apartment that had once been filled with love but now only carried ghosts. I found old photos me and Daniel at prom, at our wedding, cradling Sophie as a newborn. My hands shook as I shoved them into a box, Sophie noticed. "Do you want me to throw them away?" I shook my head. They're part of our story, but they don't define our ending." She hugged me tightly. Finally, the day came. We rolled into the foyer of our new house. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the hardwood floors in golden light. The air smelled of fresh paint and promise. I moved through each room slowly, touching walls, running my fingers along counters, marveling at the space. It was everything I had dreamed of in sleepless nights after the crash. And then the studio. Blue walls, shelves waiting for music books, and at the center a Yamaha grand piano gleaming under the morning sunday. My breath caught. Tears blurred my vision as I wheeled closer, brushed my fingers across the keys and pressed one. The sound rang clear, full, alive. Sophie clapped, her eyes shining. "It's perfect, Mom. It's ours." For the first time, I believed her. The house smelled of new beginnings, fresh paint, sawdust, polished wood warmed by sunlight streaming through wide windows. It wasn't just a house. It was proof that I could demand more than survival. Proof that I could still create beauty, even in the wake of ruin. Sophie and I unpacked boxes slowly, carefully, like we were placing pieces of ourselves into the bones of this new life. She taped drawings on her corkboard, pinned little notes from friends, filled her shelves with books. Her laughter echoed down wide hallways that welcomed her voice instead of swallowing it. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. The kitchen was my first victory. Counters adjusted to my height, cabinets that pulled out with ease, no bruised knuckles, no narrow doorways. I rolled through it like a conductor guiding an orchestra, every piece of it built to accommodate me. "Look at you, Mom." Sophie grinned, leaning against the doorway as I pulled a pan from the oven. "Like you own the place." "I do," I said softly, more to myself than to her. But the true heart of the home, the reason I had fought so hard, waited in the back, the studio. The first time I opened its door, I froze. The walls were painted a soft blue, the shelves already stocked with my old sheet music and teaching tools. And in the center, like a crown jewel, stood the Yamaha grand piano. Its polished surface reflected the morning sun, the lid gleaming like it was holding a secret. My throat tightened. My fingers trembled as I wheeled closer. I brushed the keys lightly, pressing one. The sound rang out, deep and resonant, filling the room with clarity. Sophie clapped her hands. "Play something." I hesitated. For months my piano had been silent, a reminder of what I thought I'd lost. But here, in this room built for me, silence no longer had power, so I played. At first, just a hesitant chord. Then another. My hands found their rhythm, the melody rising like breath after drowning. Sophie sat beside me on her keyboard, matching my notes clumsily but with determination. The music wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and so was I. Word spread quickly. A new piano teacher in Naperville, one who taught from a wheelchair, one who understood resilience as deeply as rhythm. Parents called. Students arrived timid and left smiling. The studio became a sanctuary. Children's laughter mixed with scales and exercises, the walls filled with Sophie's drawings and the doodles of her new friends. Parents lingered in the lounge corner she had insisted on, sipping coffee and watching their kids learn. I was no longer the woman who lost a leg. I was Miss Thompson, the teacher who pushed her students to find their courage in every note. One evening after lessons ended, Sophie stayed behind. She carried her keyboard into the studio, setting it beside the piano. "I've been working on something," she said shyly. "I want you to hear it." Her fingers stumbled at first, but soon a melody emerged, slow, searching, full of hope and longing. It wasn't polished, but it was raw and honest. Tears burned my eyes. "Sophie, that's beautiful." She smiled nervously. "I want to go to music school one day. Maybe even open another studio with you." My chest ached with pride. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about reclaiming my life. It was about giving Sophie the courage to build hers. Still, the past lingered at the edges. I saw Daniel once during those months. He came by with another envelope, another payment. His face was thinner, his hair a little grayer, the circles under his eyes darker. He looked like a man being eaten alive by secrets. "I'm supposed to drop this off," he muttered, holding the envelope like it was burning his hand. I took it without comment. He lingered. "Sophie won't respond to me." "She knows enough," I said evenly. "That you were unfaithful. That you left. She doesn't want lies. She doesn't want excuses. She just wants peace." He swallowed hard. "And Ethan," I cut him off. "That's your problem now, Daniel. Not mine." His shoulders slumped. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. But he didn't. He just turned and walked away, leaving the echo of his footsteps in my bright new house. Despite his shadows, our home blossomed. My waitlist grew. Kids filled the studio. Parents asked about recitals. Neighbors waved when I rolled down the street. At night, Sophie and I sat on the back porch, sipping cocoa while the sun dipped below the horizon. She leaned her head against my shoulder, humming softly. "I like it here," she said. "It feels safe." That word wrapped around me like a blanket. For so long, safety had been ripped away from the crash, from betrayal, from the sterile loneliness of hospital rooms. To hear her say it now, "In this house we built from ashes," was everything. But safety is fragile. One evening, as the studio emptied and I stacked books on the shelf, I noticed headlights pulling into the driveway. My chest tightened. Through the window, I saw a figure step out of a car, Daniel. He stood there, staring at the house he had paid for but would never call home. His face was drawn, his body slouched with exhaustion. He looked less like the man who once mocked my dreams, and more like a ghost haunting his own life. My stomach knotted. What was he here for now? Another check? Another plea for Sophie? Or something darker? The knock on the door was soft, almost hesitant, but to me it sounded like a thunderclap. The kind of sound that makes your chest tighten, that reminds you that ghosts don't need to rattle chains to haunt you. Sometimes, they just knock. I froze, my hand hovering over the lock. Sophie was upstairs, her music faintly drifting down the hallway. The thought of her hearing this knock, seeing his face, it made my stomach twist. I unlocked the door anyway. Daniel stood in the porch light, his suit wrinkled, tie loose, eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked older, shrunken. A man who had been fighting battles he couldn't win. "Claire," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I studied him for a moment, weighing the cost. This was my home now, my sanctuary. Letting him cross the threshold felt like letting a storm inside. But I stepped back anyway, because ghosts don't vanish if you pretend they're not there. 5 minutes, I said. He walked in, looking around like a stranger. His eyes lingered on the wide doorways, the ramps, the piano gleaming in the studio. "You did it," he murmured. "You really built it." "No," I corrected. "You built it. I just claimed it." He flinched at that, but didn't argue. We sat in the living room, an armchair between us like a buffer zone. He held an envelope, thick with paperwork. "The next payment?" he said, placing it on the coffee table. "On schedule, like always." I didn't touch it. "That's not why you're here." He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Number, it's Sophie. She won't talk to me. Won't answer my calls. My texts. I show up at school and she walks the other way." I crossed my arms. She's protecting herself, and frankly, She's protecting me. You don't get to demand her forgiveness just because you finally noticed the silence. His eyes flashed. She's my daughter too. She was, I said quietly. You traded her for something else when you chose that other life. He winced but pushed on. And Ethan? He asks questions. Rachel, she's exhausted. She didn't sign up to raise him alone while I... He trailed off, eyes darting away. I'm drowning, Claire. The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. Drowning. As if he hadn't been the one to push me into the water in the first place. I leaned forward, voice sharp. You let me walk into traffic, Daniel. You saw me. You froze. And then you let me lose a leg. Don't come here looking for lifeboats. His face drained of color. No, I cut him off. You don't get to rewrite it. You don't get to say you're sorry now because your second life is harder than you thought. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally he spoke, his voice cracked. Do you hate me? The question startled me. Not because of its vulnerability, but because of the way he asked it like a child, not a man. I took a deep breath. Hate takes energy. I spent too long giving you all of mine. What I feel now is... nothing. And nothing is worse than hate. His shoulders sagged. He looked at the floor, like the weight of my words was too much to bear. Sophie's footsteps creaked on the stairs. She appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes hard. What's he doing here? She demanded. Daniel stood quickly. Sophie, I just wanted to see you. She cut him off. You don't get to show up here and pretend we're still a family. You don't get to smile at Ethan at soccer games and then expect me to call you Dad. Her voice trembled with fury and pain. You picked them. And you let Mom pay the price. So go live with your choice. Tears filled his eyes, but she didn't wait for a response. She turned and stormed upstairs, her bedroom door slamming like a gavel. Daniel looked at me, desperate. Please, Claire, help me. Tell her. I won't, I said firmly. This is her boundary, and I respect it. You should too. He sank back into the chair, covering his face with his hands. For a moment he looked like he might shatter right there. After a long silence he whispered, I've lost everything, haven't I? I stared at him, really stared. This was the man who had mocked my dream of a studio, who had sneered at the thought of buying a house, who had kissed another woman under a red umbrella while holding a little boy's hand. Yes, I said simply. You have. He nodded slowly, as if he already knew the answer. The 5 minutes I'd promised stretched into an hour. He talked about Ethan's sleepless nights, about Rachel's frustration, about bills piling up. It was almost pathetic, listening to him confess the collapse of the life he had built on lies. But I didn't feel pity. I felt distance. A canyon between us that no words could bridge. When he finally stood to leave, he looked at me one last time. You've become stronger than I ever imagined. I met his gaze without flinching. No, Daniel. I just stopped letting you convince me I was weak. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. With a defeated sigh, he walked out into the night. After he left, I locked the door and sat in the quiet. My hands shook. Not from fear, but from release. He was a ghost. And ghosts lose power once you face them. Sophie came downstairs later, her eyes still wet. She curled beside me on the couch, resting her head on my shoulder. Are we really free of him now? She whispered. I kissed her hair. We're as free as we choose to be. Spring sunlight streamed through the wide windows of my studio, spilling across the polished floorboards and catching the glossy curve of the Yamaha Grand. The air carried the faint scent of fresh lilacs from the garden ramp outside. For the first time in years, life didn't feel like something I was surviving. It felt like something I was creating. The studio hummed with life every afternoon. Children's laughter echoed against blue walls, little fingers stumbling through scales, parents sipping coffee in the lounge corner Sophie had dreamed up. Each lesson wasn't just music, it was resilience, rhythm stitched together with courage. Word spread across Naperville, the piano teacher who taught from a wheelchair, who knew how to turn loss into harmony, and then there was Sophie. She was blossoming before my eyes. One evening, after my last student had left, she carried her keyboard into the studio. I finished it, she whispered. Cheeks flushed. She sat beside me, fingers trembling on the keys. The first notes were hesitant, but soon her melody unfurled a song of quiet strength, of storms weathered, of hope rising from ruins. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It was hers. When she finished, the last note hung in the air like a prayer. Tears blurred my vision. "Sophie, that's beautiful," she smiled shyly. "I want to study music, Mom. Maybe one day open another studio with you. 2 places, side by side." My chest ached with pride. The dream I thought I had lost wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. Sometimes, Daniel crossed my mind. Not in longing, not in anger, just in memory, like an old scar you can still trace with your fingers. He had become a shadow, drifting somewhere between the life he'd chosen and the wreckage he left behind. Sophie no longer asked about him. And I didn't bring him up, because this wasn't his story anymore. It was ours. One Sunday afternoon, Sophie and I hosted a small recital. Parents filled folding chairs in the studio, their children perched nervously on the piano bench, waiting their turn. The room buzzed with chatter, with community. When Sophie played her song, silence fell. Her melody was fragile and strong all at once, weaving through the air like light through stained glass. I watched the faces in the room, mothers clutching their chests, fathers nodding softly, children wide-eyed. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, and I knew, in that moment, that the echoes of betrayal, of pain, of hospital rooms and narrow apartments, they no longer defined us. Music did. That evening, Sophie and I sat on the back porch, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. She leaned against me, warm and steady. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Not fighting harder to keep Dad?" I thought about it. About Union Station, about the red umbrella, about headlights blinding me before darkness took everything. I thought about hospital sheets, about cold silences at our old kitchen table. And then I thought about this house, this studio, this porch, this music. "No," I said softly. "I don't regret letting go of something that was already gone. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop holding on." She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. We sat in silence, the evening air filled with the faint hum of neighbors' sprinklers, the rustle of leaves, the memory of music still lingering, resolution, ending. The house glowed behind us, alive with color and laughter. The piano in the studio waited for tomorrow's lessons, tomorrow's songs. My leg was gone, yes. My marriage was gone, yes. But I wasn't. I was here, still playing, still teaching, still moving forward. And beside me, Sophie hummed her melody, our melody, proof that broken doesn't mean finished. It means rewritten.